The War Council of Sorvith Prime had been deliberating for 2 hours and 14 minutes, which Logan knew because there was a clock on the wall of the antechamber, and he had been looking at it with the focused attention of a man who has run out of other things to do. The antechamber itself was a room designed to impress people who were waiting in it. Tall ceilings veined with bioluminescent mineral deposits that pulsed at irregular intervals. Walls of dark stone imported from somewhere that was presumably very far away and very expensive. And a single bench that was ornamental rather than functional, and which Logan had stopped trying to sit comfortably on approximately 40 minutes ago. He was now standing near the window. The view was of Sorvith Prime's capital, which was a city built in tiers along the face of a continental shelf, lit from below by the planet's shallow phosphorescent ocean, and which was, by any reasonable measure, one of the more extraordinary things Logan had ever seen. He had been looking at the clock instead. A junior council aide had brought him water twice. The second time, the aide had also brought a small plate of something that was either a delicacy or a garnish, and had presented it with an expression suggesting that Logan should be honored. Logan had eaten one piece carefully, determined that it tasted like salted mineral and mild pride, and thanked the aide with what he hoped was the appropriate level of gratitude for something he could not fully identify. The doors opened at the 2-hour and 19-minute mark. The council chamber was larger than the antechamber in the way that oceans are larger than ponds, not merely a difference of scale, but of category. 12 council members were seated in a curved formation that was clearly designed to make the person standing at the center feel the specific geometry of their attention. Logan walked to the center and stood there with the ease of a man who had stood in worse places under considerably less ceremonial conditions, which was true, and which the council appeared to find either admirable or faintly suspicious. Possibly both. High Counselor Verath, an older Sorvith woman whose silver-threaded robes and long, sharply upswept ears conveyed a dignity that had been cultivated over several decades and was now largely self-sustaining, spoke first. Soldier Logan. She said his name the way someone reads an inscription on a very old monument. 10 engagements, 10 outcomes in favor of the Alliance. The Council has reviewed each one. I appreciate that, Logan said. The 4th engagement, said a council member to Verath's left, a man with the look of someone who had personally audited every report and found several things he was still thinking about. You had 4 operational units remaining. The Veth Coalition had 43. 41, Logan said. 2 had already developed navigation conflicts due to the ion density in that sector. They weren't functional combat assets. There was a pause. 41, the council member repeated, in the tone of a man who does not find this significantly more reassuring. Verath allowed a brief silence, the kind that functions as punctuation, and then continued. The council has deliberated on the form of recognition most commensurate with what you have done. It is our position that a standard commendation is insufficient. She glanced, briefly, and with the precision of someone who does not glance accidentally, at a data panel to her right. In accordance with the oldest traditions of Sorvith honor, we have determined to offer you something of genuine worth. Logan waited. He had learned over the course of a decade in situations that rewarded patience, that the content of a sentence usually arrived if you did not interrupt it. Princess Ariana, Verath said, 3rd daughter of the High Council lineage, will be assigned to your company as a permanent diplomatic companion. This is the highest personal honor Sorvith can extend. The chamber was very quiet. I'm grateful, Logan said after a moment, with the careful tone of a man who is selecting his words the way a person selects footing on uncertain ground. She has already been informed, Verath added. Something in the way she said it, the slight precision of it, the faintest adjustment in her otherwise immaculate composure, suggested that this portion of the day had also not been entirely straightforward. Logan nodded once, with the equanimity of a soldier who has accepted stranger orders under worse circumstances and trusts that the logic will reveal itself later. He was not certain the logic would reveal itself later. He had, however, learned that this was the correct posture regardless. He was escorted from the chamber by the same junior aide, who offered him a third glass of water with an expression of genuine sympathy that Logan found, under the circumstances, more informative than anything the council had said. Vareth 7 was a station that had been built for function, and then decorated for diplomacy, which meant it had excellent structural integrity and curtains that cost more than most spacecraft. It occupied a stable orbital position between Sorvith Prime and the outer relay network, close enough to the planet to be considered an extension of its authority, and far enough away to give that authority a degree of plausible deniability when needed. The diplomatic quarters on its upper ring were spacious, climate-adjusted to accommodate multiple species preferences simultaneously, and furnished with the kind of careful neutrality that suggested a great deal of money had been spent ensuring nothing looked like it had been purchased with a great deal of money. Logan arrived first. He set his kit bag on the floor near the door, looked at the two rooms branching off the central living space, and selected the smaller one on the left without significant deliberation. He had lived in smaller spaces under less pleasant conditions, and had developed, over time, a genuine indifference to square footage that was one of the few things his decade of service had given him without also taking something else in return. He put his bag inside, noted that the bed was longer than any bed he had slept in for approximately 3 years, and went to locate the kitchen. The kitchen had a beverage synthesizer, a cold storage unit stocked with items he did not immediately recognize, and a manual brewing station that appeared to have been included as a cultural gesture rather than an anticipated feature. Logan examined the manual brewing station with the attention of a man who has found something that matters. There were 4 types of imported coffee. He was reading the labels when the main door opened. He heard her before he saw her, not because she was loud, but because the particular quality of silence that entered the room with her was the kind that had texture. It was the silence of someone who had arranged their composure with great care and was carrying it like luggage through a crowded terminal. Ariana stood in the doorway of the kitchen for a moment. She was tall, with the deep crimson complexion of the Sorvith high lineage, her dark hair drawn back in a way that was either effortless or had taken considerable effort to appear so. Her ears, long and slightly tapered at their upswept ends, were held in a position that Logan would later learn indicated formal neutrality, the Sorvith equivalent of a face that gives nothing away. She was wearing traveling clothes that managed to suggest ceremonial weight without actually being ceremonial, which was a difficult thing to achieve, and which she appeared to have achieved without trying. She looked at him. She looked at the coffee labels in his hand. "The larger room," she said, "is on the right." "I took the left," Logan said. A pause crossed her face, not confusion exactly, but the brief recalibration of someone whose prepared architecture has met an unexpected load. "The larger room is the appropriate accommodation for a member of the high lineage." "Then you should have it," Logan said, and set the coffee labels down and moved toward the central space to give her room to pass. She did not move immediately. "You chose the smaller room deliberately." "I chose it first," he said. "That's usually how it works when one person arrives before the other." Ariana considered this with the focused expression of someone determining whether they have been insulted or simply encountered a different operational logic. She moved past him into the central space, examined it with the thoroughness of someone conducting a quiet assessment, and placed her travel case on the low table near the window with a precision that was, Logan noted, not accidental. It was placed exactly where it would be visible from every point in the room. He filed this information without comment. She explored the quarters with a composure that was clearly practiced and a curiosity that was clearly genuine and occasionally won. She paused at the atmospheric controls and made 2 adjustments without asking, which raised the ambient temperature by 2 degrees and shifted the light spectrum slightly toward the warmer frequencies. Logan noticed both changes and said nothing, because 2 degrees was not unreasonable, and because he had spent enough time in hostile conditions to know that comfort was a resource worth managing thoughtfully. "The synthesizer," she said from across the room, "has a sorvith-cultural menu." "I saw that," Logan said. "You were reading the manual coffee labels." "I was." She turned to look at him with an expression that was trying to remain neutral, and was doing a competent job of it. "Is coffee a significant cultural practice for you?" Logan thought about it honestly. "It's the part of the morning I do before I'm required to be reasonable," he said. Something happened at the corners of her mouth that was not quite a smile and was clearly not going to be acknowledged as one. Her ears shifted, very slightly from their formal position, a fraction of a degree, no more, in the direction of something that was not formal neutrality. It was, Logan would eventually understand, a significant distance for them to travel. She picked up her travel case from the table, moved to the larger room, and closed the door behind her with the quiet finality of someone establishing terms. Logan returned to the kitchen, selected the coffee he had been reading about, and began the process of making it by hand, which took 11 minutes and which he considered, on balance, a reasonable way to begin what was clearly going to be a complicated arrangement. 3 days into the arrangement, Ariana had established several things with considerable precision. Her morning schedule began at the 6th station hour and involved a sequence of activities that she performed with the regularity of someone who believes that discipline is a form of argument. She used the central living space for reading between the 7th and 9th hours, during which time she sat in the chair nearest the window with the focused stillness of a person who is absorbing information and would prefer the surrounding environment to behave accordingly. She took her meals at specific intervals and prepared them using the synthesizer's sorvith cultural menu with the efficiency of someone who views eating as a logistical matter rather than an occasion. Logan observed all of this with the attention he applied to most things, which was complete and undemonstrative. He adjusted his own schedule around hers without announcing that he was doing so, which meant he made his coffee before the 6th hour and read his operational reports in his room during the window she used the central space. He did not think of this as a concession. He thought of it as reading a terrain feature and moving accordingly, which was a habit so ingrained it no longer required a decision. On the 4th day, a message came through the station's diplomatic channel requesting Logan's presence at a meeting in the lower ring. The message was from Sira, the Alliance's senior diplomatic attaché for the outer systems, who had been stationed on Vareth 7 for the past several months, coordinating the post-engagement reconstruction efforts for 3 of the colonies that Logan's operations had, in various ways, made reconstruction necessary and also possible. He left at the 8th hour. Ariana was in her chair with a data tablet, and he told her he would be in the lower ring until midday. She acknowledged this with a brief nod that indicated she had heard him and considered the information filed. He left. She returned to her reading. This was, by the standards of their 4 days together, a normal interaction. Sira met him in one of the lower ring's small conference rooms, which had a viewport looking out at the station's docking array and 2 chairs that were considerably more functional than the ones in the diplomatic quarters. She was a compact, precise woman who moved through administrative complexity, the way Logan moved through operational complexity, with economy and without visible stress. She had been coordinating reconstruction across 3 colony systems, while managing the political sensitivities of 4 different governing bodies, and had the look of someone who has been solving difficult problems long enough that difficult problems no longer feel like a special category. She thanked him for the 6th engagement specifically, because the 6th engagement had been the one that kept her colony's primary atmospheric processor from becoming debris, which would have rendered the colony uninhabitable within approximately 9 months. She said this directly and without ceremony, in the way that people express genuine gratitude when they have moved past the stage of not knowing how to express it. Logan accepted it with the discomfort he always felt when recognition arrived in verbal form, and which he managed by focusing on the practical details of what she was describing. They talked for an hour and 40 minutes about the reconstruction logistics, about the navigational hazards that still existed in 2 of the affected sectors, about a new relay station that was being proposed for the outer network, and which Sierra believed was strategically mispositioned. Logan had opinions about the relay station's positioning. They discussed them. It was, by the standards of his recent days, an unusually comfortable conversation, which mostly meant it was about things with clear parameters. He returned to the diplomatic quarters at the 11th hour and 40 minutes, which was slightly before midday. Ariana was no longer in her chair. She was standing at the atmospheric controls on the far wall, making an adjustment that did not appear to require the degree of attention she was giving it. She did not look up immediately when he entered. "The meeting ran short," Logan said. "I wasn't monitoring the time," Ariana said, with the precision of someone who had been monitoring the time. He moved to the kitchen and began the process of making lunch from the items in cold storage, which he had been doing for 4 days, because cooking was a task with clear steps and a defined outcome, and he found both of those things restful. After a moment, Ariana came to stand in the kitchen doorway. "The diplomatic attaché," she said. "Sierra." "Yes," Logan said. "She's been stationed here for several months. Since the post-engagement period began," he said. Ariana was quiet for a moment in a way that had a specific quality to it, not the formal neutrality she carried in her posture, but something more compressed, like a calculation running behind a neutral screen. Her ears, which Logan had been learning to read the way he learned to read any new instrument, were positioned slightly forward and very still. He had not yet established a full vocabulary for what that meant, but he was developing a working hypothesis. "She seemed very grateful," Ariana said, in the tone of someone making an observation about weather. "Her colony's atmospheric processor survived," Logan said. "Gratitude seems proportionate." "Naturally," Ariana said. Logan placed 2 portions on the counter with the equanimity of a man who has identified the terrain and chosen to walk through it at a steady pace rather than around it. "I made enough for 2, he said. "The Sorvith cultural menu has been getting a considerable amount of use. I thought you might want something different." Ariana looked at the food. She looked at him. Her ears moved through 3 distinct positions in approximately 2 seconds, which Logan was fairly certain constituted a complete sentence in a language he did not yet speak. She sat down at the counter without further comment and ate, and the compressed quality in the room silenced slowly, incrementally, became a different kind of silence, one that had somewhat less structural tension and somewhat more of something else that Logan did not immediately try to name, because he had learned that some terrain was best crossed before it was mapped. The diplomatic crisis arrived on a Tuesday, which Logan found faintly appropriate. Tuesdays had a history, in his experience, of containing more structural instability than the other days of the week, and he had long suspected this was not coincidence, but rather some quality inherent to the day itself that the universe had not yet seen fit to explain. The crisis concerned the Dravathi corridor, a navigational channel running between 2 outer systems that had been technically neutral territory for 11 years and had recently become significantly less technical about it. The Marin Collective, which administered one end of the corridor, had deployed 3 automated boundary markers that extended their claimed jurisdiction by approximately 40 kilometers into what the Veth Coalition considered their operational space. The Veth Coalition had responded by deploying 6 markers, which extended their claim by 90 kilometers in the opposite direction, and had also sent a formal protest written in language that was diplomatic in structure and geological in temperature. The Marin Collective had replied within 6 hours, which was fast enough to suggest they had prepared the reply before receiving the protest, which suggested the markers had not been an accident. The message reached Vareth 7 at the third station hour. Logan read it in his room, dressed, and went to make coffee. Ariana was already in the central space when he emerged, which was unusual for the third hour, and she was standing at the viewport rather than sitting in her chair, which meant she had also received some version of the briefing and was processing it in a way that required standing. "You've seen the corridor report," Logan said. "My council briefing arrived at the second hour," she said. "The Marin deployment was not unilateral. Someone advised them on the timing." Logan looked at her. "You think it was coordinated?" "I think 40 kilometers is a very specific distance," she said. "Specific enough to be a message rather than a miscalculation." He considered this while drinking his coffee, which he had made in 4 minutes rather than 11, because the situation had adjusted his priorities. She was right about the distance. He had thought the same thing and had been less certain he could articulate why until she did it for him, which was a thing that had been happening with increasing frequency over the past week and which he was choosing, for the moment, not to examine too carefully. The meeting was called for the 7th hour in the station's primary conference suite, which was a room designed to make disagreements feel historically significant. Representatives from both the Marin Collective and the Veth Coalition were present via quantum link projection, which meant they appeared at opposite ends of the conference table as figures of light and static that occasionally flickered when someone raised their voice, as though the technology itself found conflict mildly destabilizing. 3 alliance mediators were present in person. Logan was present as a military consultant, which was a title that meant the alliance wanted someone in the room who could calculate outcomes, and preferred that person not to be visibly calculating them. Ariana attended as a Sorvith diplomatic observer, which was a role that theoretically placed her outside the active mediation, but practically meant she was the most politically significant person in the room, and everyone present was aware of it. The meeting was loud in the way that meetings are loud when the people in them have decided that volume is a form of evidence. The Marin representative, a man named Korath whose projection flickered most aggressively when he was making his strongest points, argued that the boundary markers were a defensive measure necessitated by 3 prior incursions that had gone unaddressed. The Veth Coalition's representative, a woman whose projection was very stable and who Logan suspected was therefore the more dangerous of the two, argued that the markers violated 11 years of established corridor protocol and represented an act of territorial aggression that the Alliance had an obligation to formally condemn. Logan sat at the table and said nothing for 2 hours and 20 minutes. He watched Korath's flickering. He watched the Veth representative's stillness. He watched the 3 Alliance mediators cycle through their prepared frameworks with the slight desperation of people applying known tools to a problem that had evolved past the category those tools were designed for. He made 3 notes on his data tablet. 2 of them were operational observations. The third said, simply, coffee, because he had made it in 4 minutes that morning and could taste the difference, and wanted to remember to allow 11 minutes regardless of the situation, which was a lesson he appeared to keep needing to learn. At the 2 hour and 21-minute mark, he said, "The markers are a secondary issue." The room reorganized its attention toward him with the speed of people who have been waiting for someone to say something different. He laid out what he had observed in 11 sentences. The corridor dispute was not about the corridor. It was about a resource extraction license in an adjacent sector that was due for renewal in 40 days, and whose terms both parties believed would be influenced by whoever currently held the stronger territorial position in the corridor. The markers were not aggression. They were negotiating leverage, deployed early enough to become established fact before the license discussion began. The Marin representative's projection stopped flickering. The Veth representative's stillness changed quality in a way that confirmed Logan's assessment more thoroughly than an agreement would have. The room was quiet for a long moment, And then one of the alliance mediators said, carefully, "If that's the actual structure of the dispute, the license renewal framework is the appropriate venue to address it." And the meeting began, slowly and with some reluctance, to move toward a resolution that had not been visible 2 hours earlier. Ariana said nothing during this. She sat at the far end of the table with the composed attention of someone watching something they find interesting and intend to think about later. Her ears were angled slightly and precisely in Logan's direction. He noticed. He returned his attention to the mediators. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes, and the boundary markers were agreed to be a temporary administrative inconvenience pending the license review, which was the diplomatic equivalent of everyone quietly agreeing to pretend the last 3 hours had been about something more manageable than they had actually been about. They walked back to the diplomatic quarters without speaking for the first several minutes. Then Ariana said, "You knew before the meeting." "I had a hypothesis," Logan said. "You let them argue for 2 hours before saying it." "A hypothesis presented too early becomes the thing people argue against instead of the thing they consider," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "That's a very patient way to be right," she said, in a tone that was not quite a compliment and was not quite not one either. "It's the only way that works," he said. Her ears moved. He was getting better at reading them, and what they said, briefly and without her apparent authorization, was that she found this answer both accurate and somewhat annoying, which meant she had already thought of it herself. He did not mention this. Some terrain, he had learned, was acknowledged more usefully by crossing it than by mapping it aloud. The argument began, as the more consequential arguments tend to, over something that was not the argument. It was the 9th day. Logan had made dinner, an actual dinner, constructed from recognizable components rather than synthesized approximations, using a method that required attention and produced results that were, by the station's available standards, genuinely good. He had done this without announcement, which Ariana had learned was how he did most things, and she had emerged from her room at the 18th hour to find the central space smelling of something warm and specific, and the table set with the quiet efficiency of a man who considers presentation a form of respect rather than performance. She sat down. She ate several bites with the careful attention of someone conducting an honest assessment. Then she said, "This is a Terran preparation method." "Yes," Logan said. "You've adapted it for the available ingredients." "The cold storage has had the same items in it for 9 days," he said. Adaptation seemed more productive than complaint. Something at the edge of her expression acknowledged this without committing to a position on it. She ate in silence for a moment and then said, "The Sorvith cultural menu is not a complaint." "I didn't say it was." "You implied it." "I said adaptation seemed more productive," Logan said. "That's an observation about my own behavior, not a judgment about yours." Ariana set down her utensil with a precision that had a specific weight to it. "You do that consistently," she said. "You word things in ways that are technically accurate and structurally evasive at the same time." Logan considered this. "I word things accurately," he said. "What they evade is usually something that wasn't asked directly." "I'm asking directly now," she said. "Do you find the arrangement difficult?" The question landed in the room with the particular quality of something that had been prepared and then deployed, and Logan recognized this the way he recognized most prepared deployments, by the precision of the timing and the specific choice of terrain. He looked at her steadily. Her ears were in the formal neutral position, which he had come to understand meant she was paying the most attention, not the least. "No," he said. "Do you?" She picked up her utensil again. "I find it irregular," she said, which was either an answer or a deliberate substitution for one, and which told him considerably more than a direct answer would have. The dishes were cleared. The station's environmental system cycled through its evening transition, shifting the light spectrum toward a cooler register and dropping the ambient temperature by 1 degree, which it did every night at the 19th hour with the reliability of something that had been doing it for years and intended to continue. Ariana adjusted the controls by 2 degrees, as she did every night, and the room returned to the temperature she preferred. Logan had stopped noticing this as a correction and started noticing it as a feature, which was a shift he had not tracked the exact moment of. They sat in the central space, which had become, over 9 days, a room they occupied together rather than a room they occupied in shifts. Ariana had a data tablet. Logan had a navigational report from the outer relay network that was 40 pages long and interesting in the way that things are interesting when you understand the larger pattern they belong to. The silence was the comfortable kind, which it had not always been, and the distance it had traveled to become comfortable had not been small. Then Ariana said, without looking up from her tablet, "The Sorvith High Codex contains 17 documented cases of battlefield honors that included personal assignments of this kind." Logan looked up from his report. "In 12 of the 17 cases," she continued, in the measured tone of someone presenting research rather than making an argument, "the assigned individual was unhappy with the arrangement, and the record reflects this in considerable detail." She scrolled something on her tablet. "In 3 cases, the historical record is ambiguous. In 2 cases, the outcome was considered by both parties to be satisfactory." 2 out of 17, Logan said. 12%, she said. "Those are not encouraging odds." "No," she agreed, "they are not." He set his report down. "Which of the 17 cases does ours most resemble?" She was quiet for a moment that had several layers to it. Her ears, which had been in the careful neutral position, shifted to something that was not neutral, forward slightly, with a quality that he had come to associate with honesty arriving ahead of composure. "None of them," she said. "The documented cases all involved individuals who had decided what the arrangement was before it began." She paused. "I decided what it was before it began." "What did you decide it was?" Logan asked. "A political instrument," she said. "A council's solution to an administrative problem, something to be managed with appropriate dignity until a more suitable resolution could be arranged." Her ears moved again. "I had a list of resolutions." "How many were on the list?" 4, she said. "I've discarded 3. Logan looked at her steadily. "Which one is left?" She met his eyes with the directness of someone who has crossed a considerable internal distance to arrive at a position and is not going to pretend otherwise. "The one where I stopped treating it as a problem requiring resolution," she said. The room was quiet. The environmental system maintained its temperature. Outside the viewport, the phosphorescent light of Sorvith Prime's ocean caught the edge of the station's hull and made it briefly luminous. "I should tell you something," Logan said. "I've never found recognition comfortable. When the council announced the award, I spent 3 seconds being genuinely concerned, and then spent the rest of the ceremony applying the same attention to the situation that I apply to operational problems." "And what did that attention produce?" Ariana asked. "A working hypothesis," he said, "that the 11th engagement was going to be the most complex one." He paused. "I'm revising the hypothesis." Her ears moved through a sequence that he had enough vocabulary now to read as something between exasperation and something considerably warmer than exasperation. "Revising to what?" she asked. "That complex isn't the right word for it," he said. "Complex implies the outcome is unclear." The silence that followed was not the formal kind or the careful kind. It was the kind that exists after something has been said that both people needed to hear and neither had planned to say first, and which settles into a room the way light settles, not arriving but simply, gradually, being present. Ariana looked at her data tablet for a moment, then set it down. "Your dinner," she said, "was significantly better than the synthesizer." 11 minutes of attention, Logan said. "It makes a difference." "So I'm learning," she said, and the corners of her mouth did the thing they had been doing since the first morning, the thing that was not quite a smile and then, tonight, was. The 14th morning on Vareth 7 began the way the previous 3 had begun, with Logan making coffee at the 5th hour and Ariana appearing at the 6th, which was earlier than her established schedule and which neither of them had commented on, because some adjustments are more honestly acknowledged by continuing them than by naming them. She came to the kitchen doorway with a date, a tablet, and the Sorvith High Codex, which was a text she had been reading in the evenings with increasing frequency, and which was, as far as Logan could determine, approximately 900 pages long and organized according to a system that prioritized philosophical coherence over navigational convenience. She set both on the counter and accepted the coffee he had already prepared for her, a detail she registered without surprise, which meant she had noticed when he started doing it and had decided that noticing was sufficient acknowledgement. Section 44, she said, opening the codex to a page she had marked with 3 separate indicators, which suggested she had strong opinions about it. The Sorvith theory of strategic patience. I'm familiar with the concept, Logan said. You're familiar with the practice, she said. The theory is more interesting. She turned the tablet toward him. The page contained a dense passage of Sorvith text accompanied by a diagram that appeared to illustrate the relationship between timing, restraint, and outcome, using a visual language Logan found elegant and only partially comprehensible. The fundamental argument is that patience is not the absence of action. It's the most precise form of it. Every moment you don't act is a choice with the same weight as the moment you do. Logan looked at the diagram. The Council's mediators could have used this at the corridor meeting, he said. The Council's mediators needed it approximately 6 weeks before the corridor meeting, she said. That's the point of Section 44. He drank his coffee. She read. The station's morning cycle brought the light up gradually through the viewport, the planet below catching it first along the continental shelf's upper tiers, and then spreading it down toward the phosphorescent ocean in a sequence that was, by any honest accounting, extraordinary, and which they had both stopped consciously noticing in the way that you stop noticing extraordinary things that have become your ordinary context. The message from the High Council arrived at the 7th hour. Logan read it first because it came through the military channel and arrived on his data terminal. He read it twice, set it down, and went to refill his coffee with the deliberateness of a man performing a routine action, while a less routine thought settled into place. When Ariana looked up from the codex and saw his expression, which was the careful neutral expression he wore when something required processing before it could be presented, she set her tablet down. The Council, he said, has completed its review of the Dravathi Corridor resolution. They've attributed the outcome to successful alliance mediation. He paused. They've also reviewed the preliminary report on our arrangement. They want to discuss restructuring it. Ariana was very still. Restructuring. There's a diplomatic post opening on the outer relay network, Logan said. A permanent assignment. They consider it a more suitable placement for someone of your lineage than a shared station quarter and an ongoing proximity to military operations. He set his mug down. They've framed it as an elevation. The silence had a specific temperature. And you, she said, what does the Council propose for you? A commendation, he said. Formal, recorded. My 10th through 11th engagements officially recognized in the Alliance Registry. He looked at her steadily. The 11th engagement being the corridor resolution, which I'm listed as having contributed to in an advisory capacity. Advisory capacity, she repeated, in the tone of someone tasting a phrase and finding it considerably less than accurate. It's a generous commendation, Logan said. It's a filing system, she said. Her ears were fully forward now, and her posture had lost the careful architectural quality it maintained in moments of formal neutrality. What replaced it was something that was direct and unguarded and considerably more itself. They want to put us both somewhere manageable and call it a promotion. Yes, Logan said, and what do you want to do about it? He looked at her for a moment, at the forward set of her ears, at the expression that had stopped performing composure and was simply present, at the data tablet, and the codex on the counter between them and the coffee cup that had been prepared before she arrived because some adjustments, made honestly, become their own kind of statement. "I want to send a reply," he said, "if you're in agreement." She looked at him. "What does the reply say?" "That I'm declining the commendation pending a review of the engagement classification," he said. "An advisory contribution is a different record than a primary operational role, and I'd like the record to be accurate." He paused. It would require a co-signature from a Sorvith diplomatic observer with direct knowledge of the engagement, specifically the corridor meeting. Her ears moved through a sequence he knew now, the full vocabulary of it, assembled over 14 days of attention. And what it said was that she understood exactly what he was doing, found it both precise and entirely characteristic, and had already decided her answer before he finished the sentence. "I'll need to decline the outer post as well," she said, "on the grounds that a diplomatic observer cannot responsibly abandon an active observation." "The arrangement is still active," Logan said. "Remarkably so," she said. He drafted the reply in 11 minutes, which was, he had come to understand, the amount of time he needed when something mattered enough to do correctly. She read it, made 2 adjustments to the diplomatic phrasing that made it simultaneously more formal in structure and more immovable in substance, and signed it with the precise signature of someone who has made a decision and is putting their name on it without reservation. They sent it together at the 8th hour. The council would receive it within the standard relay window and would understand, with the clarity that precise language provides, that the arrangement was not a problem requiring resolution, and that the 2 people inside it had arrived at this conclusion independently. And then, at some point between the first morning and the 14th, at the same time, Ariana picked up the codex and found her page. "Section 45, she said, addresses what comes after strategic patience has produced its outcome." "What does it say?" Logan asked. She read for a moment. "It says the difficulty of the waiting does not determine the value of what you waited for," she said. "But it says the attention you paid during the waiting does." Logan considered this honestly. 14 days of attention, to coffee made in 11 minutes, to ears that spoke a language worth learning, to a woman who had arrived with a list of 4 resolutions, and discarded 3 of them in the same period. He had been revising a hypothesis downward from complex to something that had a clearer outcome than he had initially estimated. "Section 44 was better," he said. "Section 44 is always better," she agreed, and turned the page, and the morning continued, and outside the viewport the planet's ocean caught the full light of its star and held it, for a moment, like something it intended to keep.